When I was in high school, I lived in a small town in the Midwest and worked at a historic, but failing, dual-screen theater. Unfortunately, the building itself was on its last leg structurally, and interior and cosmetic renovations hadn't been made since the mid-1980s, when a wall was built over the original stage and converted to a cinema. However, I adored the building and was deeply saddened by its decrepit state. Many of the locals didn't care for the theater once they started showing movies, and business dropped enormously from then to when I was employed there in 2007. Most of my shifts, I barely saw more than a dozen people for each showing, if that. Some days, we didn't have a single person come in. My manager and I eventually became good friends, and he gave me a key to perform nightly janitorial duties. Needless to say, I was psyched. I loved the idea of coming in after hours to work and try to make the theater look more presentable and not a typical smelly discount shithole. I would purchase cleaning supplies myself and brought my mom's vacuum cleaner in because the theater didn't have one. I tried as much as a 17-year-old could do to make the place more attractive because it seemed everyone else gave up on her. One Friday night at around 12 a.m., I decided to borrow my uncle's steam cleaner to clean up the seats in the second theater. It would have been a lengthy task, but I just got done smoking a joint with a buddy and I had no issue finishing my night off listening to music and cleaning with a buzz. I entered the theater as usual and began completing petty tasks before tackling the big job. Eventually, I entered the second theater and experienced a very uneasy feeling. I never felt uncomfortable in there before, but for some reason I couldn't shake this pressing feeling on my chest. I assumed I was just a little panicky from the pot, turned my music down, and started getting to work to try and get my mind off it. I had my back facing the screen and was scrubbing the second to last row near the exit when I suddenly heard a lot of rustling coming from behind the screen. This didn't come as much of a shock to me, considering that we had some pest issues in some of the storage rooms behind the screens. Thinking it was a raccoon trying to hide after hearing the droning noise of my steam cleaner, I continued on and didn't pay much mind to it until the rustling became very distinct. Whatever the noise was, it was coming from under the screen, inside the large metal grate that leads to the stage behind the screen, and it was big. I turned my cleaner off and stared at the grate, partially frozen in fear, and continuing to reassure myself that it was a raccoon, or maybe even a dog or something. The noise became more prominent, and after what seemed like hours had elapsed of me just staring at the grate, trying to determine what the creature was, the metal grate made a slow and ominous screeching noise as it was being pushed out from the inside. I continued to stare in intense fear as I witnessed what came tumbling out. A nearly bald head with a couple strands of gray, dirty hair greeted me before an old, naked woman absolutely covered in dirt, insects, and blood came crawling out on all fours and looked at me directly. She paused as she was fully out and forcefully grinning at me with her toothless mouth. I'm not sure how much time went by, but I honestly felt like my feet had melted into the floor. I truly thought I was hallucinating. The way she was positioned like that seemed unreal, and although I was terrified, I think I was more perplexed by her contour. She was a character from Silent Hill I hallucinated, and that was some really bad weed. This was the thought playing over and over again in my mind, until she started crawling very quickly towards me without saying a single word, maintaining her grin with her head cocked back and her sagging breasts bouncing back and forth, hitting her bloody arms and smearing dirt and blood together. At that moment, I felt urine starting to come out, and I jumped over the last 2 rows of seats. I still can't believe I did that in one leap, and ran as fucking fast as I could to the exit door in the front lobby. I could hear distant shuffling as I slammed the door behind me, locked it, and ran to the police station, which was just a couple buildings away. I gave them the key, called my manager, and told him I wasn't going back. The woman who crawled after me, according to police, was a homeless, schizophrenic meth addict who decided to take up residency under the screen after managing to enter through a small opening from the outside of the building. When they arrived, she was crawling around in circles in the lobby, grunting manically like an animal. It appeared to them that she had been staying there for at least a week to shoot up meth, and she more than likely watched me during my janitor days, grinning that toothless grin as I swept away, unaware of her presence. It was definitely the absolute scariest moment of my life, and needless to say, I stopped coming in by myself to clean up. Since then, the place is closed and is completely boarded up. I miss it greatly, but whenever I come back to the area, I always find myself wondering if she's sleeping in there.
A little bit of background history on myself. My name is Camilla. I'm 21 years old, and this happened to me when I was 14 and my parents were out of town visiting my grandmother, who was very sick. I lived in a very small town where everyone knew each other by face. The schools were great, the kids were very well behaved and very friendly to one another, and not a whole lot of crime history. I was walking home from school one day, till I see this elderly lady named Mrs. Kelly outside her house planting her garden. She comes over to me and says, "Have you seen my little girl?" I asked her, "Who's your daughter?" She responded, "Her name is Jade." I never knew Jade, because everyone in the neighbourhood would refer to Mrs. Kelly as the crazy lady. One night I was supposed to go to a sleepover at my friend Danielle's house, until I heard my dogs Gigi and Brett barking and growling furiously. I peeked out of the blinds and saw Mrs. Kelly standing at my front door. I told my older brother Sammy, since he was 16 at the time and the only person that kept an eye on me. I told Sammy what happened, and he goes to the door and sees Mrs. Kelly, and he politely asked her to leave. Sammy brought Mrs. Kelly home, and everything was great for the next 4 days. This one night will forever haunt the shit out of me. Me and Sammy fell asleep in my room because I was terrified of the dark when I was younger, and he slept on the floor while I was in my bed. I had a sick feeling that someone was in my house, and I poked Sammy and said, "I think someone's in our house. Can you check it out?" He said, "Alright, Camilla." He grabbed my dad's gun and saw a figure of an old lady standing in the hallway. He flips the lights on and she said, "Give me my daughter back!" Sammy calls the police and my parents come home an hour later. I hear Mrs. Kelly yell, "I want my daughter! I want my little girl!" I later came to find out that Mrs. Kelly is now signed into a mental home, and I also found out Mrs. Kelly's daughter died in a car accident at my age, along with her husband in the mid-60s. I felt sorry for the old lady, but the fact she thought I was her daughter was terrifying. I hope I never have to encounter stuff like this again.